This is A News. I'm Bakhtiar Sanova, and let's go through the main headlines. Overnight clashes in the Strait of Hormuz raise doubts over a fragile U.S. Iran ceasefire. Israel and Lebanon announce new talks following fresh clashes in southern Lebanon. And Azerbaijan says that a recent European resolution is undermining peace efforts with Armenia. Tensions between the United States and Iran have escalated after overnight exchanges in the Strait of Hormuz, raising doubts over a fragile ceasefire that Washington insists is still in place. Here is more.
U.S. President Donald Trump says a ceasefire between the United States and Iran remains in place after both sides exchanged fire late on Thursday night.
After these strikes, is the ceasefire with Iran still on?
Yeah, it is. They trifled with us today. We blew them away. They trifled. I call that a trifle. I'll let you know when there's no ceasefire. You won't have to know. If there's no ceasefire, you're not going to have to know. You're just going to have to look at one big glow coming out of Iran. And they better sign their agreement fast. Oh, it's going. The talks are going very well, but they have to understand, if it doesn't get signed, they're going to have a lot of pain. They're going to have a lot of pain. They want to sign it, I will tell you. They want to sign it a lot more than I do.
Although it remains unclear who fired first, the United States said it carried out what it described as self-defense strikes after Iranian attacks targeted U.S. Navy-guided missile destroyers in the Strait of Hormuz. Posting on Truth Social, Trump said the U.S. had destroyed several Iranian small boats, adding that great damage had been done to the Iranian attackers. Iran initially reported explosions in the Strait of Hormuz, calling it a clash with what it described as the enemy. Separate reports also said blasts were heard in Tehran. A military official quoted by state television said Iranian forces fired missiles at what it called hostile units in the strait after an alleged U.S. strike on an Iranian oil tanker, forcing the vessels to retreat.
Minutes ago, some reports indicated that sounds of explosions were heard near Keshem Island. Following these reports, an informed military official said that after the aggressive U.S. military targeted an Iranian oil tanker, hostile enemy units in the area of the Strait of Hormuz came under Iranian missile fire and, after sustaining damage, were forced to flee.
U.S. Central Command, or CENTCOM, called the Iranian attacks unprovoked, saying Iran launched missiles, drones and small boats at U.S. Navy destroyers in the Strait of Hormuz, while adding it does not seek further escalation, but remains prepared to protect American forces in the region. The latest clash came just one day after Iran's foreign ministry said it was considering a U.S. proposal aimed at ending the conflict. All that followed, Trump recently saying the conflict would end quickly. U.S. outlet Axios reported the White House believes it is close to a 14-point agreement with Tehran that could lead to wider nuclear talks, while Iran said the latest U.S. proposal is still under review and will be shared via Pakistani mediators.
Iran's UN envoy has rejected the U.S.-backed draft resolution that Washington has submitted to the UN Security Council, calling it deeply flawed. The draft demands that Iran halt attacks and stop obstructing navigation through the Strait of Hormuz. Meanwhile, Tehran says its armed forces issued a statement following the clashes late Thursday. It's accusing Washington of violating the ceasefire. Our correspondent in Iran sent this report.
Iran's armed forces said they exchanged fire with the U.S. late on Thursday, accusing the U.S. Navy of violating the ceasefire near the Strait of Hormuz, which connects the Persian Gulf and the Sea of Oman. The spokesman for the Khatam al-Anbiya Central Headquarters, Colonel Ibrahim Zulfaqari, warned in a statement on Friday that Iran would give a crushing response to any aggression without the slightest hesitation. Following the exchange of fire between Iran and the U.S., the Revolutionary Guards Navy also said in a statement that it opened fire in response to what it described as ceasefire violations and aggression by the U.S. military near the Strait of Hormuz and forced enemy destroyers to retreat. In a related development, Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, in a letter to the UN Secretary General and the President of the Security Council, criticized the US and Bahrain for proposing a joint draft resolution at the Security Council regarding Iran's control over the Strait of Hormuz. Meanwhile, Foreign Ministry spokesman Ismail Baqai said on Thursday that Iran is considering a US counter-proposal aimed at ending the war in response to Iran's plan. He made the remarks during a visit to the religious city of Qom to meet senior clerics, adding that Iran has not yet responded to the US proposal received through mediator Pakistan because its review process is still ongoing. Amid reports of an imminent announcement regarding a peace process arrangement between Iran and the US, Foreign Minister Araghchi also held a phone call with the Pakistani Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister Mohammad Ishaqdar. According to local media, citing a Foreign Ministry statement, the two sides reviewed the latest regional developments and trends and emphasized the importance of continuing dialogue and diplomacy. Turaj Shiralilu from Tehran, Foreign News.
An oil tanker that made it through the Strait of Hormuz has arrived at a port in South Korea. The vessel, named the Odessa, is carrying 1 million barrels of crude from the Middle East, easing pressure on the country's refining industry. The shipment equals about half of South Korea's daily crude consumption. The tanker reportedly cleared the Strait of Hormuz shortly before the waterway was blocked for a second time. Another tanker carrying crude oil is expected to arrive next week. Global food supplies could face serious strain from late 2026 into 2027. That's according to the UN Food and Agriculture Program. It says fertilizer storages linked to the shipping disruption in the Strait of Hormuz are affecting harvests around the world. Speaking at a major UN conference in Rome on Thursday, the FAO chief warned that even a delay of fertilizer deliveries of a few weeks could sharply reduce harvests. This time of year is typically a critical window for crop development. He said that the impact is likely to hit Africa, Asia, and the Middle East the hardest. Oil prices have jumped again amid the latest tension between the United States and Iran over the Strait of Hormuz. The global Brent oil benchmark price initially rose almost 3% to nearly $103 a barrel, before falling back to around $100 a barrel. At the same time, West Texas Intermediate U.S. crude futures rose to nearly 2% to $95.66 a barrel. Both benchmarks were up more than 3% at the market open. Israel and Lebanon will hold a third round of talks in Washington, D.C. next week, according to U.S. State Department officials. The announcement follows clashes in southern Lebanon on Thursday, as tensions between Israel and Hezbollah persisted. Israeli forces remain deployed in a strip of southern Lebanese territory, saying it's to prevent attacks by Hezbollah, which it accuses of operating from within civilian areas. Tensions escalated further on Wednesday after a strike in Beirut's southern suburbs, where Israel says it killed a senior commander from Hezbollah's elite Radwan unit. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said that there was no immunity for militants, warning Israel will continue targeting its enemies. A brief ceasefire has become the latest point of dispute between Russia and Ukraine, with both sides giving conflicting accounts of events on the ground. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has also warned allies of Russia not to attend the May 9th Victory Day parade.
Russia and Ukraine are trading accusations over a temporary ceasefire announced around Moscow's Victory Day commemorations. Russia's defense ministry said on Thursday that it will halt military operations from midnight on the 8th of May until the 10th of May to mark the anniversary of the Soviet victory over Nazi Germany in World War II. The move follows a ceasefire proposed by Ukraine starting on the 6th of May. Kyiv says Moscow did not respect that earlier proposal, with President Volodymyr Zelensky accusing Russia of continuing drone and missile attacks, shelling, and frontline assault operations. Zelensky criticized Russia's ceasefire announcement, linking it to Moscow's 9th of May Victory Day commemorations and warning foreign officials against traveling there.
The Russians want Ukraine's permission to hold their parade so they can safely take to the streets for an hour once a year and then go back to killing our people and waging war. The Russians are already talking about strikes after May 9th. The logic of the Russian leadership is strange and clearly inappropriate. We have also received requests from some countries close to Russia stating that their representatives plan to be in Moscow, a strange desire these days. We do not recommend it.
Ukraine's Air Force said it intercepted 92 of 102 Russian drones launched overnight, while Kyiv continued long-range strikes inside Russia, including attacks on facilities in Perm, Chelyabinsk and Yekaterinburg. Meanwhile, Russian officials also reported a major wave of drones heading towards Moscow in the hours before the Russian-announced ceasefire period began. The Kremlin said security for President Vladimir Putin had been tightened ahead of Victory Day events, citing threats from Ukraine. For now, the ceasefire timeline remains disputed, with both sides accusing the other of escalating the conflict rather than stepping back.
Leaders from Southeast Asia have met in the Philippines for the 48th ASEAN Leaders Summit. Philippines President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. called for stronger regional cooperation amid growing economic pressure and security concerns, especially with the disruption in the Strait of Hormuz. Talks focused on energy, food security and economic coordination as rising global prices continue to strain supply chains and drive up the cost of fuel, fertilizer and essentials. As leaders gathered, protesters rallied nearby to call for Southeast Asia to move away from using fossil fuels, which they say is linked to the Middle East conflict. The United Nations and health authorities in Spain are responding to a hantavirus outbreak aboard a cruise ship heading for the Canary Islands. At least 3 people have died, while international teams are now working to contain the virus and prevent further spread.
The United Nations says it is coordinating an international response after a hantavirus outbreak aboard the MV Hondius left 3 people dead and prompted a multinational health operation.
A WHO expert boarded the ship in Cabo Verde and has been joined by 2 doctors from the Netherlands and an expert from the European Center for Disease Prevention and Control. They will stay aboard the ship until it reaches its next destination in the Canary Islands. They are conducting medical assessment of everyone on board and gathering information to assess the risk of infection. Yesterday, the UN team supported authorities in Cabo Verde with medical evacuation of 3 patients to the Netherlands for specialized treatment following the multinational operation coordinated by the Dutch, Cabo Verde, and ourselves.
Authorities in Spain say strict isolation measures are being prepared before the ship docks this weekend. Spain's emergency services chief, Virginia Barcones, said passengers will move through isolated and guarded transfer routes with no contact with the local population. Spanish officials also confirmed countries including the United States and the United Kingdom are preparing repatriation flights for their citizens. The World Health Organization, meanwhile, sought to calm fears of a wider outbreak.
This is not coronavirus. This is a very different virus. We know this virus. Hantaviruses have been around for quite a while. There's a lot of detail that we know. I'm going to ask Anais to come in and say this, but I want to be unequivocal here. This is not SARS-CoV-2. This is not the start of a COVID pandemic. This is an outbreak that we see on a ship. There's a confined area. We have 5 confirmed cases so far.
Hantavirus is usually spread through rodents, although rare person-to-person transmission can occur. Authorities are now tracing passengers who disembarked in St. Helena on April 24th, as countries work to prevent further spread of the virus.
Trade tensions between Washington and Brussels are escalating once again. President Donald Trump is threatening higher tariffs on European goods unless the European Union removes its own levies on the United States.
US President Donald Trump has warned the European Union that tariffs on European goods could rise sharply by the 4th of July unless the bloc agrees to eliminate its tariffs on US products. The warning followed a phone call with European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen as both sides attempt to salvage a trade agreement reached last year. Trump said the EU must move towards zero tariffs or face what he described as much higher duties. Brussels, however, says negotiations are still progressing. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said both sides remain committed to implementing the agreement, despite growing political and legal obstacles. Under the current framework, most EU exports to the United States would face tariffs of around 15%, lower than the 30% previously threatened by Washington. But disagreements remain over US duties on steel and aluminium, with European lawmakers insisting any final deal must protect key industrial sectors. The agreement has already received conditional backing from the European Parliament, but still requires approval from all 27 EU member states. A US trade court has ruled that the administration's latest 10% global tariffs may not be justified under American trade law, a decision that could open the door to further legal challenges. While the ruling applies only to 2 importing companies for now, analysts say it could complicate the White House's broader tariff strategy in the months ahead.
To the UK now, and the scale of the Labour Party's electoral challenge is becoming increasingly clear. Preliminary results show the party has lost ground in key local elections across England. The Tameside, a long-time Labour stronghold, Reform UK gained 18 seats, while Labour lost 14, costing the party control of the council. Reform also made major gains in Bolton, although no party secured overall control there. With results declared in 21 out of 136 councils so far, Labour has already lost control of councils including Tameside, Tamworth, Hartlepool, Redditch and Exeter. Overall, Labour has lost more than 120 seats, while Reform has gained over 160. Prime Minister Keir Starmer's party entered the elections expecting difficult results, with senior Labour figures warning the contest would be challenging. Now we'll take a short break. Right after the break, we'll discuss Middle East tensions, the fragile U.S. Iran ceasefire, and new Israel-Lebanon talks. Stay tuned. Welcome back to A News. We continue with our top story for discussion. The fragile U.S.-Iran ceasefire is under growing strain after American strikes targeted Iranian military facilities linked to attacks in the Strait of Hormuz. President Donald Trump has warned Tehran of further military action, even as Washington says negotiations on a possible deal are still continuing. Meanwhile, the United Arab Emirates reports renewed missile and drone attacks, raising fears over regional stability and global energy security. At the same time, the United States is preparing to host new Israel-Lebanon talks aimed at addressing border tensions and future of Hezbollah's military presence. To discuss these rapidly developing dynamics, we are joined by Gregory Metsu, who speaks to us from Stockholm. Mr. Metsu, welcome and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for the invitation.
Mr. Metsu, how serious is this latest escalation between the United States and Iran despite the ceasefire technically remaining in place? Do you think Washington's strikes in the Strait of Hormuz were intended mainly as deterrence, or do they signal a broader military strategy against Iran?
Well, everything seems very fragile indeed. And in my opinion, you cannot really speak about a ceasefire when both sides are still day after day threatening each other very seriously, and there are some skirmishes, if not the kind of bombing that we experienced the weeks ago, but still the Americans are deploying more and more, they are bringing more and more, and they are probably re-weaponizing the area in the wait of maybe a second phase. You are coming to a negotiation, and day after day you are threatening and taking measures and sanctions that are not really helping for a discussion. So when you really want to make a deal, you try to appease the situation. I would like to remember that we are the 8th of May. And in Europe, this is the day of the end of the Second World War, right? We are celebrating that today across Europe.
Yes.
So maybe should this inspire the negotiator to really put an end to this war?
President Donald Trump says a deal with Iran is still very possible. How do you interpret these mixed signals of diplomacy and military pressure happening simultaneously?
Well, everything is a question, what is a good deal? What is a deal? A few months ago, there was no problem in the Strait of Hormuz. Everything was going smooth and free, and now there is a problem. So in the reality, a problem was created by the war that now needs to be solved. So to solve a problem that did not exist a few weeks ago is not for me a big achievement, and it's not a good deal. Apparently, in June last year, it was stated several times that the nuclear program of Iran was obliterated. And now they are discussing about ending the nuclear program. So is it ended? Is it obliterated or not? I mean, nothing is really clear. Nobody really knows what is on the table. And I think that the situation is kind of strange because we have no idea of what they are talking about. And who is talking? You are talking to Iranian regime that months ago killed 30,000 of their population because Mr. Trump announced and told people, get to the street, we are coming to help you. They're still waiting, and in the meantime, 30,000 of Iranians dead tragically.
Mr. Mathieu, the Strait of Hormuz remains one of the world's most critical energy choke points. How concerned should global markets be about prolonged instability there?
Well, it's a problem, and this blockade of the strait is a problem for the world economy. Not so much for the Americans, honestly. They are not using much of the oil that is transiting from there. It's more a problem for China. It's more a problem for Japan. It's more a problem for Europe. For the Americans, it's not a big problem, so to say. But it's not only about oil. It's also about fertilizer, about commercial goods that are prevented to go from one place to another. But let me say again, some weeks ago, there was no problem there. Why is it a problem now?
The United Arab Emirates has reportedly faced repeated missile and drone attacks in recent weeks. How do Gulf Arab states view the current U.S. approach toward Iran? Are they reassured by Washington's actions or worried about being drawn deeper into confrontation?
I think, and I speaking to some people in the region, notably in Bahrain, they are really scared or unsecured in the area. I mean, Iran has demonstrated that it would not hesitate to attack the countries in the region, the Emiratis, the Bahrainis, and everybody else in the region should fear some action from Iran, which are somehow a little bit even against their interest. I mean, everybody knows that there is a lot of Iranian money in Dubai, and by attacking Dubai now, what is going to happen in the future? So the situation is very strange, and I would expect at some point, if Iran goes too far, that some of these countries may want to retaliate by themselves and not only rely on the, let's say, Israeli-American alliance to protect them. Also, the French are involved. The French are quite much involved in intercepting drones. They have bases in the region. So it's a lot of actors. But as for now, let's hope that things will come quiet and that deal, a so-called deal, could be achieved.
Mr. Mathieu, we're also seeing renewed diplomatic activity between Israel and Lebanon, with military representatives expected to join talks for the first time in Washington. How significant is that development?
The fact that military and very likely intelligence services are involved is a good sign, because those are indeed involved very deeply on the ground. I must say, for me, every diplomatic talks is a good sign. Mm-hmm. And when you are talking to each other, that means that there is a way to a solution. But there is, in my opinion, somebody that is absent around the table. This is Hezbollah. Mm-hmm. I mean, the Lebanese are going to talk to the Israeli, but the Lebanese government is not the problem. The problem is the Hezbollah infiltration in all parts of Lebanese society, and they are hijacking completely the country for the interest of Iran. So, can the Lebanese army try to get Hezbollah back and to stop the escalation? That's a real question, because Lebanese people, most of them, they are not interested in this war at all.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Mitchell, Russia, China and several European powers are watching these developments closely. How might these crises reshape broader geopolitical alignments in the Middle East?
China for sure, because it depends very much of the oil of the region. Russia for sure. Russia is, let's say, busy in another war in Europe against Ukraine, so their military are very much involved there. But still, they are helping Iran. They are helping Iran with intelligence. They are helping Iran with material through the Caspian Sea. Mm-hmm. So both are very much following the situation. I think that Mr. Trump spoke with Mr. Putin recently, and Mr. Putin asked for a de-escalation, and Mr. Trump's answer was kind of, well, try to fix your problem and I will deal with mine. But let's see what will happen next week or in the coming weeks during this meeting between China and the U.S. This is a very important meeting to come, and I would hope that the Chinese would kind of convince the Americans to have a better approach and a more multilateral approach.
Gregory Mathieu, thank you very much for your time and insights. We truly appreciate your perspective. Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot. You're welcome.
Thank you. After the break, we'll take a look at the key stories shaping the region. Welcome back to News, and now we turn to our regional stories. Azerbaijan says outside political interference is increasingly complicating efforts to reach a lasting peace agreement with Armenia. Here is more.
Baku is warning that outside political pressure and what it describes as biased rhetoric from certain European institutions are complicating efforts to advance the Armenia-Azerbaijan peace process, arguing that some actors are no longer behaving as neutral parties. The criticism follows a recent European Parliament resolution and comments from French Foreign Minister Jean-Noël Barrot, which Azerbaijan says undermine regional stability. Azerbaijan strongly rejects the remarks made in the French Senate on the 6th of May, saying the resolution to officially use of the term Nagorno-Karabakh for its sovereign territory is unacceptable. It also says France's comments questioning its sovereignty and cultural and religious heritage are provocative, especially after the restoration of territorial integrity and the establishment of lasting peace in the region. According to the Azerbaijani position, forces outside the region are systematically interfering in the normalization process between Baku and Yerevan. Officials in Azerbaijan argue that this creates the impression that sustainable peace and security in the South Caucasus are being pursued primarily by Baku itself. At the same time, Azerbaijan is calling on Armenia to publicly respond to such statements. Baku says that if Yerevan is genuinely committed to the peace agenda, Armenian officials should openly oppose initiatives and rhetoric that Azerbaijan believes damage the normalization process. Azerbaijani officials also argue that Armenia's institutions should clearly state that external political interventions are obstructing dialogue rather than supporting peace. Another major point of concern for Baku is the continued activity of structures and individuals linked to former separatist entities. Although Azerbaijan and Armenia have mutually recognized each other's territorial integrity, Azerbaijani officials say groups questioning Azerbaijan's sovereignty continue operating from Armenia and abroad. Baku argues that Armenian authorities have not taken sufficient practical or political steps to prevent such activity. According to the Azerbaijani position, this reflects what it describes as a contradictory approach, expecting recognition of Armenia's territorial integrity while tolerating actions that challenge Azerbaijan's own territorial integrity. Against this backdrop, Azerbaijan's parliament voted on the first day of May to suspend cooperation with the European Parliament, including participation in the EU-Azerbaijan Parliamentary Cooperation Committee. Azerbaijan has also launched procedures to end its membership in the Euronest Parliamentary Assembly. The developments mark another sign of increasing friction between Baku and several European political institutions as negotiations over a broader peace settlement continue.
Uzbekistan and Austria are expanding cooperation in trade, investment and migration. It follows high-level meetings and a joint business forum in Tashkent. Our correspondent Sevil Rajapova has more.
Tashkent hosted the Uzbekistan-Austria Business Forum, bringing together around 100 representatives from business circles and government agencies from both countries. Discussions focused on expanding bilateral trade and cooperation in green energy, mining, agriculture, pharmaceuticals and infrastructure projects. Officials said trade turnover between Uzbekistan and Austria has tripled in recent years, while Austrian exports to Uzbekistan exceeded $215 million in 2024. Deputy Minister of Investment, Industry and Trade Shokhruy Gulamov presented Uzbekistan's investment potential, while the Austrian delegation included Foreign Minister Beata Meinl-Reisinger and State Secretary for Finance Barbara Aibinger-Miedl. As part of the forum, the sides exchanged documents on avoiding double taxation, migration partnership and visa-free travel for diplomatic passport holders. Business representatives also held B2B and B2G meetings aimed at developing new joint projects. President Shavkat Mirziyoyev also had talks with Austrian officials, where the sides discussed increasing trade turnover, expanding investment cooperation and strengthening collaboration on migration and security. Another focus of the visit was cooperation on labor migration. European Union and Austrian representatives visited the Migrant Resource Center in Tashkent, which provides legal and informational support to Uzbek citizens seeking employment abroad. The meetings are expected to strengthen economic ties and create opportunities for trade, investment and regulated labor migration between the two countries. It is Sevil Rajapova reporting from Tashkent, Uzbekistan News.
China and Uzbekistan have pledged to deepen cooperation across trade, energy and infrastructure as Beijing pushes ahead with Belt and Road projects in Central Asia. News correspondent Mahnur Maktoum has the details.
Chinese Premier Li Qiang met Uzbek Prime Minister Abdullah Aripov in Beijing, where both pledged to deepen bilateral cooperation in trade, energy, connectivity, the digital economy, and green development. Li stressed the importance of advancing high-quality Belt and Road cooperation, including the China-Kyrgyzstan-Uzbekistan railway project, while also calling for closer coordination within multilateral platforms such as the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and the China Central Asia Mechanism. The Chinese premier said that Beijing is willing to expand imports of Uzbek products, including cotton, gas, and silk, encourage further Chinese investment in Uzbekistan, and strengthen people-to-people exchanges through additional direct flights and visa facilitation measures. Additionally, Aripov reaffirmed Uzbekistan's support for the One China principle and described China as a long-term strategic partner, while expressing support for deeper cooperation under the Belt and Road Initiative. The meeting took place during Aripov's May visit to Beijing, where he also co-chaired the 8th session of the China-Uzbekistan Intergovernmental Cooperation Committee with Chinese Vice Premier Liu Guozhang. Discussions focused on expanding cooperation in trade, transport, agriculture, science and technology, security, and cultural exchanges, as both countries seek to strengthen their all-weather comprehensive strategic partnership for a new era. Mani Maktoum, A News, Beijing.
Georgia is reaching out to Washington with a message. Let us start over. Prime Minister Irakli Kobakidze has met with the U.S. State Department delegation, pushing for a full reset of bilateral ties. It comes just weeks after the two sides broke their silence with a landmark phone call. Our Nini Nikolashvili has more.
Call it a reset or call it a rescue mission, Georgian Prime Minister Irakli Kobakidze met this week with U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of State Sonata Coulter, presenting Tbilisi's vision of rebuilt relations from a clean slate with a concrete roadmap focused on tangible results. At the center of discussion sat a topic that increasingly defines Georgia's strategic value: the Middle Corridor, the East-West trade and connectivity route linking Central Asia to Europe through Georgian territory, and one Washington eyes with growing interest as global supply chains are being redrawn. The road here was rough when Prime Minister Irakli Kobakidze suspended EU accession talks in late 2024. Washington cut the strategic partnership entirely, citing violations of core democratic commitments. The silence only broke in late March when the two sides spoke by phone at Secretary of State level, the highest contact in years, unlocking what is now a visible and accelerating diplomatic sequence. Then came a moment that carried its own weight. Days before this week's meeting, Georgia's Prosecutor General announced the arrest of 5 active and former security officers for violence against protesters and journalist Guram Rogava during the 2024 demonstrations. Notably, this was the first time since those turbulent protests that any law enforcement officer faced criminal accountability for violence against demonstrators or press. Opposition figures called the timing a gesture of goodwill ahead of Washington's arrival. But perhaps the sharpest observation is this: Georgian Dream has spent months in open confrontation with Brussels, branding EU demands as blackmail and interference. But toward Washington, the register is entirely different: warm, ideologically aligned, and eager. Tbilisi has consistently presented itself as a natural partner for the U.S. President Donald Trump's administration, sovereign, pragmatic, and connectivity-driven. Two Western partners, but rather two different tones, and Georgia betting everything on which relationship it can still save. Nini Nikolashvili, Tbilisi, A-News.
Afghanistan's health ministry and UNICEF are expanding cooperation to improve healthcare access, including vaccinations, nutrition, and emergency medical services in remote areas. Tamim Bahis has more details.
The Ministry of Public Health says the meeting took place here in Kabul between Public Health Minister Nur Jalal Jalali and UNICEF's representative for Afghanistan, Dr. Tajuddin Uyewali, along with his delegation. According to the ministry, the discussions focused on ways to improve healthcare delivery, especially in remote parts of Afghanistan where access to medical services remains limited. Both sides talked about expanding health facilities in underserved areas, supporting vaccination campaigns, and carrying out joint monitoring of health services. Minister Jalali said strengthening Afghanistan's healthcare system remains a key priority for Afghanistan. He said efforts are underway to provide more equitable and effective health services across the country. He also stressed the importance of continuing support from international partners, saying long-term cooperation is needed to develop the health sector further. UNICEF representative Dr. Uyewali briefed the minister on the organization's current work in Afghanistan. He reaffirmed UNICEF's commitment to continuing technical and operational support in key areas, including maternal and child health care, vaccination, nutrition, and emergency medical services. The meeting highlights ongoing cooperation between the Afghan health authorities and UNICEF at a time when many communities, particularly in rural areas, continue to face challenges in accessing basic health care. Tamim Bahis in Kabul, A-News.
Now we'll take a short break. Right after the break, we'll discuss South Asia 1 year after the India-Pakistan conflict and its evolving security landscape. See you shortly. Welcome back to A News Now. We turn to South Asia, where Pakistan has reaffirmed its readiness to respond to any future attacks as the region marks 1 year since the brief but intense military exchange between India and Pakistan in May 2025. The 4-day confrontation involved missile strikes, drones, artillery fire, and air operations following the April 2025 attack in Jammu and Kashmir. Although a ceasefire was later reached with U.S. mediation, both countries have since continued to modernize their military capabilities, strengthen border defenses, and deepen strategic partnerships with global powers. The developments remain closely watched because India and Pakistan are both nuclear-armed neighbors, and their security calculations have implications far beyond South Asia. To help us better understand the strategic messaging, military posture, and broader geopolitical implications, we are joined by Hamza Iftikhar, Assistant Professor of Political Science at the Lahore University of Management Sciences, speaking to us from Lahore. Mr. Iftikhar, welcome to the program and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Mr. Iftikhar, how do you interpret Pakistan's latest statement marking the anniversary of the May 2025 conflict? What message is Islamabad trying to send domestically and internationally through this renewed military rhetoric?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you summed it up pretty well. It has been 1 year, and it was a pretty intense conflict. Pakistan's statement is primarily a deterrence message. It's not just a rhetoric. They want to make sure that not just domestically but also internationally, the narrative gets reinforced that Pakistan was compelled to respond after unjustified Indian airstrikes in Pakistan, and the response to it afterwards, domestically as well as internationally, seemed to indicate that Pakistan was able to successfully restore its deterrent capabilities and deterrence in general. Internationally, obviously, the message is that the Pakistan does not seek war. But however, any future unjustified, illegal Indian military action will definitely be met with strong and calibrated response like it did a year ago. And so that's just making sure that, everybody knows that Pakistan is able to reassert credible deterrence capabilities without wanting to escalate, but should the need to escalate be there, it can definitely defend itself.
Mr. Iftikhar, how has the security environment between India and Pakistan evolved since the ceasefire agreement last year?
So the environment, I would say, has been pretty much the status quo since the two countries were formed. It's still have been more militarized, more technologically intense, and I would say, if anything, less politically stable. So the ceasefire was helpful in stopping the hostilities, but it definitely did not address any of the underlying causes, and the main cause definitely was the illegal occupation of Kashmir. So those kind of issues are inherent and lead to fighting like these. So even if the ceasefire was adhered to, everything else seems to be the status quo. So the immediate violence was definitely reduced, but it did not reduce the risk for another structural, crisis or so on and so forth.
So we saw extensive use of drones and precision systems during the confrontation last year. What did that reveal about the future of warfare in South Asia?
That's a very interesting question, and we see this happening in the Gulf right now as well with the Iran and U.S. crisis. It seems like the military warfare kind of is significantly evolving in itself, and the India-Pakistan conflict also seemed to indicate that there was a lot of focus towards unmanned aircraft, drones, and air defense systems, as well as electronic warfare and kind of rapid escalation. We kind of have a lot of similarities if you do a comparative analysis between what is happening in the Gulf and what happened a year ago between India and Pakistan. And it seems like both are now trying to understand this new wave of the need of technologically advancement with cheaper technology that is rapidly available and rejuvenated, but also making sure that there are least amount of human casualties or risks involved in terms of forces and people who are operating these. So in terms of drone interception, drone manufacturing, retaliation, air defense systems, I think focus has definitely been in terms of military industry has been towards these kind of technologies. So I would say that the May 2025 definitely delivered new insights into how conflict is going to evolve in the coming years, and we're seeing that happen in the Gulf right now.
Mr. Iftikhar, how significant was the role of the United States in helping secure the ceasefire? And could Washington play a similar role again if needed?
I think the U.S. role is pretty significant, even if it was downplayed by the Indian side. I think the U.S. definitely helped de-escalate the conflict into something that would have been maybe much more difficult to contain. If it got a hand, we have credible reporting, obviously from reputable news organizations like yourself that did attest to behind-the-scenes diplomacy involving Washington, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Vice President J.D. Vance. They were both involved in intense diplomatic contacts. And there was also support from the European countries as well as the Gulf countries. And Pakistan acknowledged this openly, right? And so the U.S. did play a significant role. Pakistan has been very vocal and open about what the importance was for the negotiations and diplomatic efforts of the U.S. So it does remain, there's no doubt that the U.S. remains influential. And in this particular region as well, but also other regions as well, U.S. does have its role maintained, being the most, arguably one of the most important crisis manager. And so I would see Washington playing or continue to play a role if anything were to happen again in any part of essentially South Asia, but like we're seeing in the Middle East right now.
Mr. Iftikhar, do you see any realistic pathway toward a sustained dialogue or confidence-building measures between New Delhi and Islamabad?
So that's an interesting question. Theoretically speaking, like the academic in me would definitely say that the pathway does exist. But when you look at empirics and if you look at practical side on the ground, politically, it's a very, very narrow pathway. So the realistic, let's say, expectation should not be to assume or imagine there's a grand peace process immediately, and we're kind of seeing that play out in the Iran-US conflict as well, but more so kind of like a very step-by-step. The more history is involved, the more baggage you have on both sides. It's then important to kind of manage the expectations accordingly. So the way forward should be definitely some sort of communication, right? Whether that is backdoor communication or through intermediaries, but as long as there is communication, there is then a pathway to whatever the future may hold. But obviously the pathway is contingent upon the issue of Kashmir. Unless and until the Kashmir conflict is not solved, and India doesn't recognize the UN Security Council resolutions that have been passed and international law obligations on its illegally occupied Kashmir, there's no realistic path forward to anything resounding peace.
Hamza Iftikhar, thank you very much for joining us and sharing your insights with A News. We appreciate your time and expertise. Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
This concludes our news update for the hour. Thank you for your time and stay with us.